Alright, you're live, man.
Oh, already?
Actually, you can adjust it the way you like it. I'm gonna do everything Instagram and Facebook in a bit.
Okay, cool.
Hey, Alan.
How's everyone doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good.
How you doing?
Fantastic. I'll teach you guys how to make an aquarium. If you guys have any questions, just ask me any question along the way, because this session is going to be rudimentary. So any additional questions, please ask, because it'll help. I'm just going to say the same thing I always do. So.
You get started first, man.
Should we get started now? Should we get started now? Okay. All right, guys. So we're gonna start with a, I believe this is a two-gallon aquarium. So it's considered nano. Anywhere along the way, definitely ask any questions whatsoever. So for this, how do I start this? All right. So before you start any aquarium, I always like to put. Or let me ask, like, what do you think is the most important aspect of an aquarium? I think for me, it's the fact that you have a very strong bacteria culture supporting your ecosystem. Because if you think about it, we ourselves, we're 4% bacteria by dry mass. Without those bacteria in our gut, none of the food we'd be eating would be available for us to absorb. So the same goes with all the bacteria in your tank. They make all available organic matter, all detritus, convert it into available forms that your plants can absorb. And that's pretty much all what bacteria do. They help accelerate that process so that plants can grow very vigorously and algae will stay away. Because if you have a really vigorous, the idea of how I set up my planted tanks is that I have such a vigorous plant mass growing that it's outcompeting the algae in every corner of my tank, and that's how I want to go about taking care of the algae. It's not taking out the algae as it grows in. It's just preventing the algae in the first place, right? So how I like to begin with all my tanks is just some bacteria powder. We do carry this in the shop, and I just like to sprinkle it at the bottom just to get just a layer underneath the soil, and I like to dissipate this throughout. Not just the bottom here, but I'll also sprinkle some like on top of the soil once I add it in. I just like to have all the bacteria spread around throughout the tank so that it will colonize faster at every point in my tank. And with the small tank, it'll be really easy. And this is about all that's needed for the bottom. It's just a very thin layer. And, oh yeah, by the way, so my approach for this tank is gonna be a low-tech tank, no CO2. So we're gonna add weaker lights, we're going to add slow-growing plants, but I'll talk about that later on. For the soil, because I'm doing a low-tech approach, I find that the best soil would be 80A Malaya. This soil is not as nutritious as Amazonia and won't leach nutrients as quickly as Amazonia, so this is what I find to be really good for slow root feeders, slow growers that won't be flooded with all the nutrients that will be released by the substrate. So I'm just going to add just a half an inch to an inch layer. I like to add like a thinner layer just so that when I do add my hardscape in here, I like to fill in extra soil around it so it stabilizes, doesn't want to fall over as willingly. And here I'll probably add another thin layer of bacteria. I like to add layers of bacteria just every inch or half inch I go. So when I found to do this with my tank, which I was using regular 88 Amazonia, and that soil has a lot of ammonia in it. And when I did this method, the day of that I filled the tank, within a week, the ammonia levels went down to like 1/4 of what the website said how much it'll make the water column. Sorry, I'm off today. Sorry, guys. It's a long last night. What I'm saying is, what I'm trying to say is, if you do this method, if you have the bacteria spread around evenly throughout the tank, they will colonize a lot quicker. So I did this with my Amazonia. Amazonia does leach a lot of ammonia, but my Amazonia, I was able to add like fish like the day after. They had a tiny bit of ammonia burn, but they easily recovered in the next 3 days. So let's see.
See your Hansel face here, John?
My what?
Are you able to see your own face?
Yes, I can. So because this is a really small tank, I'm just trying to utilize as much space as I can in this tank. I typically like when tanks are this small. Typically, like if I'm doing working with just solely rock, I typically like a main stone and just a supplementary stone. And with the tank this small, I think this is more than enough. And then from here, I'll fill in the little gaps with soils just so that the rocks won't tip over as easily. I'm going to add a little bit more height on the back, maybe a half an inch to an inch more compared to the front. And soil depth really doesn't matter. You guys may have researched the fact that like you make your soil too deep, you might create like, what is it, H2S, right? Or any poisonous sulfuric compound. Well, in nature, you never see a lake that's just only like a couple inches in soil. I'm very sure you can dig through the entire earth. So in nature, what happens is those gases in anaerobic conditions rise up to aerobic conditions, and they get metabolized into inert forms by aerobic bacteria. So that's how you never get an accumulation of harmful or poisonous gas in the water in any lake or pond ecosystem. But that's not how it works. Well, of course, if you like create a substrate super deep and then you decide to like disturb it profoundly, just like lift up everything, then of course you will release those gases. But if you just leave everything settled as is, the aerobic bacteria will handle all those harmful compounds for you. So you really don't have to worry about not making the substrate too thick. So I think this is decent enough for, let's see, let's add a little more. Alright, so that's all the soil I'm gonna use, and so now I guess what we're gonna do now is I guess we can go on to planting already. So I just chose some low-tech, slow-growing plants. These guys will, I personally feel, will do really well in this soil. Like I mentioned earlier, the soil will release nutrients a lot slower compared to other brands within this, other lines within this soil brand, ADA. So the plants I'm using right now are all the crypts that we have in the shop. I just picked a small selection of all those crypts that we do carry. So cryptocorynes are slow-growing plants. they really have a habit of developing really strong root structures before they start blooming outwards. So you typically, when you buy any crypt, I notice it takes around like, in low-tech conditions, it'll take around 3 to 4 months for the root structure to grow in. And for crypts, they really want to get the root structure growing out before they actually start to grow out their leaves, I noticed. So definitely want to provide them with nutritious soil so they can sprout those roots a lot quicker. So when I do take all these crypts out of the pot, what I do is I'll take it out the pot and I'll take out all the mineral wool. It's really important to take off all this wool just so that you want to really eliminate as much mess as possible in your tank. Even before, when I added these rocks, I sprayed these rocks down because you really want to eliminate as much dust or detritus or anything whatsoever that can possibly settle in later in your tank. That will really help out with the algae bloom. Like every tank typically gets within like the 3 to 5 week period. The cleaner you keep your tank, the less algae I notice tends to want to sprout out within those 3 weeks. So when I did take apart this crypt, it's actually not one whole plant. You can actually split it apart and it won't do any harm to the plant. So I'm just splitting it apart like this into each little bunch. It's definitely recommended. I do recommend you do this because if you were to plant it all together in one spot, now you got all these crypts like growing in one spot, trying to compete not only with algae but competing with each other for growth. So it's really nice to spread these guys around, give them some nice breathing space so that they congregate as quickly as possible. I forgot to get tweezers. I'll be right back. You can tell, like, there's each these are individual crypts, so they'll be around this small when you actually plant them. So when I do go about planting all these guys, I just like to spread them apart like the 5 pattern on a die. So I choose this to be my foreground, and I'm gonna plant these guys spread across in the front half of this tank. And when I do plant, if you were to push straight down, when you do add water, more than likely it'll come straight up. So what I like to do is I like to push it down like an inch away from the area that I'm actually going to have the plant at, and I'm going to drag it. When I drag it, the roots actually get covered much more nicely by the soil, and it'll stay there. Did you guys see that? And the same goes for all plants that I do, especially carpeting plants. Those carpeting plants are probably the most annoying, especially after you fill in water and you plant them in. So using this technique definitely helps with those plants as well. So I'm just going to plant an inch away and just going to drag the plant to where I want it to be, and then cover those roots that I dragged across with. Hey pal, can you get a spray bottle? Spray bottle. So, for crypts in particular, there's all these root structures, and you notice like this much fatter root. Definitely don't want to harm this part. This part is where the crypt stores most of its energy. So. Thanks. Spray down the substrate so it makes it easier for me to plant. This is really helpful actually. If you guys ever do work with very nutrient-rich substrate like Amazonia, what I actually did before I filled in my water was spray it down for like a week actually. And I think that's what actually caused the bacteria to establish really well in my tank. It would allow me to add really ammonia-sensitive fish early on. when it comes to like how many plants should you, or how densely you should initially plant your tank, that really depends on if you are growing high or low tech. What you really want to do in actuality is just grow your plants as quickly as possible so that they cover every part of the tank so that there's no way algae can make it home. But when it comes to low tech, it's obviously not going to grow as quickly. So one very easy way to go about compensating for that is just to plant more densely. Another way is to really limit your lights. So when it comes to low tech, the sweet spot of how long you should leave your lighting on to you want to keep your lights on as much as how long can I keep my lights on to the point where I get algae, but what's the minimum I can keep them on to keep my plants alive? So you really got to find that sweet spot. But that sweet spot's a lot smaller when it comes to low tech.
Online, man. Online right now.
And for the back, the crypt I chose was Crypt Sri Lanka. So I'm just gonna use this as background because the leaves do get a little bigger when they grow out. And the plant in the front was Crypt Wendy Brown.
Africana?
What was that?
Africana?
No, it's Malaya.
Malaya. Nice beta tank.
Beta. I put a beta in here.
Clean.
Yep. And that's going to be just about it for the planting. So what I opted out next for the lighting, which is very simple, very economical LED light. And when it comes to lighting, like everyone really thinks that you really got to use really high quality lighting. That's really not the case because without so plants, they need light, they need water, they need CO2 to create glucose. But it doesn't matter how much light you have, you don't have enough CO2 to supplement in equal increments with water and light, plants can't make the use of that light in the first place. So algae will make use of it. So you really gotta, especially for low tech, especially for all these slow growing plants, you really gotta constrain the lights. I would honestly start off with this tank personally at 5 hours, but when it comes to like how long should I keep my lights on per day, it's really pertinent to every single tank. There's so many factors that go on in every single individual tank that there's no one answer for sure, because it even comes down to how the water flow distributes throughout your tank. If you have any slower moving areas or dead spots in your tank, if you have how often you feed your tank per day, do you feed flakes, do you make sure all the fish eat all the food, so it's part of for me the main contributors are cleanliness, just overall cleanliness of your tank, making sure when you feed your fish, the fish eat all the food, feed it in little increments if you can, and be constraining on the lights. So I'm gonna put the lights. So I have to predict the way how the plants are gonna grow in the future, and that really depends on the strength of where my light's at. So if I put the strength of the light mainly back here, everywhere else will still grow because they're crypts, but I hope to see in a couple months that these crypts will grow above the rock line right here. So I'm going to settle this light right in the back here, just so that these crypts in the back get a little bit more share of the light, so they can grow above the rock line. And for the aquarium filter, what I decided to use was just this little 15 gallons per hour filter. When it comes to filtration, don't look at the number they give you on the box, like for 10, 20, 50, 70. What you should really be looking at is the gallons per hour. All what you want to calculate from that is you want your turnover rate, how many times the filter turns over the water in your tank per hour, to be roughly 10 times or over. So this is a 2-gallon tank, and we're putting a filter that's 15 gallons per hour. That's like 7.5 times turnover, which I feel like is just adequate enough for this tank, because we honestly don't have another filter. The next one up is like at least 100 gallons. So this is the best thing we could use at the shop right now. So if you guys ever think of any like places that if you think of any river or stream, you think of fast-moving water, and you think of fast-moving water, you think of tons of surface agitation, aeration, not much algae. Even though the water's a lot shallower, and even though it's a lot brighter, it tends to be a lot brighter in rivers and streams. But if you imagine like a lake or a pond, you think of stagnant water, you think of little to no water flow. And those are conditions that a lot of people, I notice, unknowingly create those kinds of conditions in their tanks. But you really want to create conditions that most mimic a river or a stream ecosystem. So when it comes to filtration, I think I'm going to put the filter in the back here, just so that this rock splits the flow in between. So when it comes to these filters, the water flow goes straight down like this, and it'll come back up. So you gotta kind of keep that in mind when you orient your filter throughout your tank. I want to always think about where's the best location I can put my filter so that I get the best evenly distributed flow throughout the entire tank. Because flow is really important, not just to keep away algae, but it's actually going to help your plants grow better. Because plants will actually be able to absorb all the nutrients, CO2, minerals through their leaves, but it can't do that without adequate water flow for you to deliver those nutrients to the plant. Yeah, I think I'll just put the filter just right back here.
Thank you.
And so when the outflow comes, this rock behind here will split the flow. Some of the flow will go underneath this tube-like structure right here, and the rest will go out here. So I think this will be a pretty decent setup for the tank. So any questions at all, guys? You good, guys? All right. Well, thank you for coming, guys, and I sure hope that you guys ask more questions. Once you guys are in the shop, definitely don't hesitate to ask any of us. All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.